in this beloved community. Thank you for the faith and hope you give all the rest of us. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this day.
Yes, sir.
God bless you.
That was former Vice President Joe Biden getting really emotional toward the end of a speech that he's given in the very church where 4 little girls were massacred by the Klan. And as he said in a moment that shook his generation, Biden talked about his own experience of losing a young child. As you know from his biography, that he lost his children in a car accident when he was in his first marriage. He talked about connecting with that loss of a child and asking yourself what that child might have been. He said that the bombing that took place in that church, in the 16th Street Baptist Church, shook my generation to the core and made us realize that working on the fringes against racism was not enough. He talked about the occupation of his hometown of Wilmington, Delaware, the longest, by the way, in U.S. history since the Civil War. 9 months the National Guard occupied Wilmington, Delaware, after Dr. King was assassinated due to, as you know, there were uprisings all over the country. He talked very nostalgically about wanting to reclaim the goodness of America. And one of the things I think that is striking about the Biden candidacy is that it is in some ways about reclaiming that idea of the inherent goodness of America. And I think it's one of the reasons that he is so appealing. It's one of the messages that Barack Obama also delivered to the country. He talked, of course, about the former president, about President Obama and his Amazing Grace moment in which he broke out in song, singing a verse from Amazing Grace, or part of a verse from Amazing Grace, as he delivered a speech after the Mother Emanuel massacre in South Carolina, and he connected it to the fact that his own son, his eldest son, Beau, had only recently died just before he attended that service, and saying that being in that service really buoyed him. I want to bring back in my panel former Governor Ed Rendell, Jason Johnson, and Tiffany Cross to get your reactions. I'm going to go to you first, Governor Rendell, because I think what you saw in that speech is the reason people really fundamentally like Joe Biden. He's somebody who's very easy to become emotional. He's somebody whose family is obviously first and foremost in his life, and the people that he loves, which also include the former president. And you can really feel the pain that he's still walking around with in the world from losing his own children, which makes it pretty poignant for him to be the guy to speak to this congregation about the loss of those 4 little girls. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, Joe. I know Joe Biden pretty well for 40 years, and if I were to tell you the thing he does best, it's be a father. He was a great father to his kids, especially right after the accident. He boarded the Metroliner every night from Washington to make sure he was home for those 2 broken little boys. He's a good man, and that's the central thing we should all remember.
Yeah. And you know, to come to the table for a moment, I mean, it is undoubted, and this is the reason I think you made this point that is true, that the reason that the Julian Castro moment, I think, dinged him so much is that Joe Biden is a likable person.
He is.
And even when you know some of the negatives from his past, even when you factor in, he is, in some ways, America. He's sort of the American white man. And he's come this long direction from a time of living in the segregation era, and has shared some of the views of people who, for some, haven't let them go. But he's shared them at times, so he sort of relates to that part of America. But for African Americans, he really is that person who's grown enough to almost be family.
Yes, I think for some African Americans, particularly a lot of older black voters. And listen, you hear Joe Biden, and he does resonate. You connect with him, you empathize with him, you sympathize with him, and so that's why people don't want to see him, you know, get beat up on any kind of campaign trail. That, however, does not make him the most electable candidate out of this field. And those are 2 very different things. And I think we have to realize that. And with all due respect to Governor Rendell, I think, you know, a part of the challenge with the surrogates is they do seem to be pulling from the chatter class and from, you know, the days of yesteryear. I mean, I shook a little bit because I certainly respect Dan Balls. I don't know in today's environment that he's the foremost political commentator that can, you know, give a stamp of approval to something. And it does feel a bit, sometimes the outlook is a bit antiquated. That's not insulting to anybody. That's not saying that, you know, Biden is not, you know, a great person with a strong testimony, and what better people to understand and empathize with his testimony than a black black church on Sunday morning. Sadly, that does not make up the voting electorate. It doesn't even make up the black voting electorate. Part of the reason Obama won is because he had all the black people and a few additional pockets of communities across the country. I don't think that Joe Biden can get that. When you think about who you have to inspire to turn out, I'm not sure how many young progressives, smaller community groups, people that you have to go out and reach in the deep pockets of America to make them feel so inspired to go out and vote. I'm just not sure he's that person. It's nothing bad or nothing against Joe Biden or his team. I think some of the praise that he gets, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy from a media who, quite frankly, is at times out of touch.
Yeah, let me let Governor Rendell respond to that before I bring Jason in. Go ahead. Your response?
Well, look, it's hard to predict what's going to happen in any election. We should have all learned that from 2016. Does Joe Biden have some challenges with his candidacy? Sure he does. But I was on TV a couple of nights ago, I forget which station, and they were attacking me about, or having me defend Joe Biden's age. Well, I said, guys, let's get real. The two major contenders with Joe Biden are Elizabeth Warren, who's 70, and Bernie Sanders, who's 2 years older than Joe Biden. What are we talking about? He's not running against Jack Kennedy at 43 years of age. That's number one. But number two, I think maybe people are misreading what America wants right now. America wants to be brought back together again. America wants someone to remind them of the values that made this country great. And I will tell you, there is no one in this field, no one in the country, in my judgment, who can do better at that than Joe Biden.
Let me get Jason on, because I think that Governor Rendell just hit on this is the wedge, right? And, you know, with the literal words that I wrote down to sort of summarize the speech for me is that Joe Biden represents the nostalgia for the notion of the inherent goodness of America, which, by the way, so did Barack Obama.
Right.
His message was, I can heal this racial divide because I grant forgiveness to the past.
Exactly.
And so there is a part of America that wants the absolution.
Yeah.
And then there's a part of America that wants change.
Yes.
And they're very different electorates, even inside the black community.
Yes, so a couple of things. That ain't my ministry, okay? That ain't the church. I'm not from the Forgiveness Church, okay? I was at Mother Emanuel. I don't forgive Dylan Roof. I don't forgive anybody who's involved in this. And I understand that politicians want to engage in that kind of behavior. I understand that maybe where Joe Biden is, but this doesn't affect him in the same personal way. It's exactly what Tiffany was talking about. I understand that Joe Biden is a sincere and passionate man, and he doesn't want to see this kind of violence, right? He obviously was affected by these things. But you know what? A couple years later, you were working with segregationists. A couple years later, you were making sure that black kids couldn't go to schools where they wanted to go to. A couple years later, you were sending people on a Senate committee after Anita Hill. A couple years later, you were signing a crime bill. Okay, that's what matters. That's what matters to me as a Generation Xer. I'm more moved by Cory Booker being at Mother Emanuel Church than I am to you talking about terrorism acts from 56 years ago. The change that we want to see in America is an America of the future. I don't care about the past. The past wasn't good. The past wasn't great. And the past wasn't something I'm nostalgic about. I want a president who's going to change this country for the better and be an anti-racist. Maybe that's going to be Joe Biden. He didn't prove that to me in this speech, and he hasn't proved it to me so far in this campaign.
And that is the divide. Therein lies. That is it. That is the divide, America. That is what this election is going to come down to. Whether the people who are saying, we're not going to do Amazing Grace, and just wipe away the past and try to go back to a past that for a lot of people they can see the history that the past wasn't sort of a glorious past that a lot of people want to reinvent it as, and those who want restoration of something that there is a nostalgia for. That is the race. You just saw it right here. Jason and Tiffany will be back later in the show. Former Governor Ed Rendell, thank you very much. Really appreciate your